What's happening here in Uganda now? Forum for Democratic Change has put demands on the table that an independent audit be conducted to look into the elections that were recently concluded, that of course saw President Museveni being declared the winner. For us to understand this, we're joined tonight by Henry Kasacha, who is indeed the Executive Director of Dialogue and Democracy Training Center here in Kampala. Of course, he also doubles as the political analyst looking at what's going on. Thanks for joining us once again. Now, Henry, let's start with the proposal or the demand of having an independent audit into the elections. Is it possible in Uganda?
Well, the demand should be possible in Uganda, but it must be put into the right context. We went into an election process with the Electoral Commission having a lot of trust issues. People are not trusting the process. People are not trusting the commission. There were demands for reform, and ideally, it was expected that many actors would not believe in the trust in the results of the election process. So, when you talk about an independent audit now, we are moving into the next stage of building our electoral process. It's really something that is supposed to lay ground for areas where we can have consensus. Consensus and political consensus is one of the things that we are trying to build in this country. So an independent audit in this country would be like an election observer report. It only makes recommendations. It cannot change anything. It cannot change the results. It cannot order a rerun, and we have that covered in the legal framework. So the independent audit, if it is done in this country, would be something that can only lay ground for having an independent opinion on the challenges of our entire electoral system and make recommendations that we can build on to improve our electoral process. So it's not really that it is something that cannot happen. It can happen, but when placed in a context of let us have an independent opinion on our process. It's not like you are refuting the results, but you are not satisfied and you don't know where the problem was. So you have that independent audit to raise those areas that require improvement.
Well, I know that it's only the Supreme Court that can be able to make such pronouncement that can be taken seriously, so as actually to either annul the elections or even suggest otherwise. But coming from President Museveni, who says that he won these elections and was declared by the Electoral Commission, which is the only body mandated to declare the results from the elections, do you see President Museveni accepting to such demands like that of having an independent audit?
These demands are laying ground for dialogue. I mean, it is trying to put something on the table that we need to talk about the electoral process in this country. And we think that we do not share the same opinions on the functioning of the electoral system in this country. You have a different position, you have your perspective, you think everything is very well. We have a different opinion and we are all stakeholders. So in the interest of building a democracy in Uganda, we would have an independent audit. And when the president accepts to this demand, it's not really necessarily saying you rigged an election, but it should be in the context of we need to improve our process. So if that context is not factored in how this demand is coming, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for the president to accept this demand. He will simply maintain, I defeated you hands down, 60% is big enough to have a comfortable majority, and I have that. I have all the local councils. I have the entire parliament is basically dominated by the NRM. So what are you talking about an independent audit? So if the demand is being made to challenge his legitimacy, we are going to have a challenge in President Museveni accepting that demand. But if the demand is being made to tell him that we need as Ugandans to sit and agree and develop a common position and an opinion on how our electoral system is running, I believe that chances are that he could say, well, let this be done.
Well, the Forum for Democratic Change is looking at, talking to civil society organization and rallying support from civil society organizations. Then you have foreign envoys and also the citizens to come up to support this. Do you think that is enough pressure that can be mounted on this government to perhaps accept to this demand?
No, I think that pressure, if we are to use that approach in terms of building pressure to accept a demand for a recommendation, we may be building too much pressure for just a recommendation. that may not have any binding legal implications. So I think that what basically that could mean is that they are going to mobilize Ugandans. They are going to mobilize. It's going to be really a political take-on, that we shall continuously disregard your presidency. We want everybody to know you don't have legitimacy in the chair, and this is not going to be a positive demand. I mean, it is not going to yield to pressure. So I see that the idea that we want to mobilize the entire society to push for this demand is also an issue that we have not exploited all the available options, maybe. So I think that in the long run, if you are to mobilize the entire country, if you mobilize the envoys, the international community, those have limits. They cannot get into these demands. They can actually support this international audit if it has national consensus. So unless there is consensus as Ugandan politicians that we need this is the only way I can see international people coming in. Otherwise, if you try to look at it from a geopolitical point of view, the idea that they are not going to cooperate with President Museveni's government are not likely to happen.
Well, and that comes on the heels of course, Kizza Besigye failing to file a petition at the Supreme Court yesterday. It seems like the door to having the issue resolved is a bit closed. Does this play for him or against him, the fact that he failed to file a petition in court?
Well, I mean, it does not play for him, it does not play against him. It's just unfortunate that he did not go to court to challenge a process. I think that going to court in this country has been accepted by Ugandans. A pronouncement on any issue can be taken as an independent opinion, regardless of whether the court will nullify the election. But once the court can say we are satisfied there were acts of unfairness, that alone is enough to support our reform process. The court may not pronounce by nullifying the results because of this issue of substantiality, that the grounds must be substantial to have changed the results. Now, if the court cannot reach that consensus, we lack voices that can make a pronouncement that can rally people across the divide. So a pronouncement of the court on a particular issue like the elections in this case is something that can build ground for reforming our political system. So for Dr. Kizza Besigye not to have gone to court, of course the circumstances surrounding are well known to so many people. He has been home since the election time. He has not been allowed. So the party has legitimate ground to say we have been denied the opportunity of using the court process. And we were not able to file our case because...
And that plays out for him, because then he has a foundation to tell the masses that we even failed to go the court direction.
Sure, that plays, it gives him good capital, it gives him good ground that you see, they have even denied us the chance. Now, where he has to move with the people is that option going to deliver what you are going to get in court? The option now that is available on the table is how do we improve our system? If he agrees that we have not gone to court, we have not nullified the results, this government is going to take oath on the 12th of May, and it will go on for 5 years, it cannot change. So you are only going to begin working on it politically to ensure that along the 5 years, people continuously begin feeling that we cannot vote for this government again. But in terms of cutting their term short, that may be very difficult.
Well, you're having, well, let's maybe shift gears and see. Now, yesterday, Mambazi managed to file a petition at the Supreme Court challenging the results that were declared by the Electoral Commission. And particularly, they said that they had issues with collecting evidence, enough evidence. When you file such a petition, you're likely to be challenged. And what are some of those challenges that this team is likely to face? I mean, if you look at the arrest of the P10 for the Forum for Democratic Change, who of course were supposed to keep an eye on the different polling stations, but also on some, they don't have DRR forms, which means you need to really have enough evidence to prove that the elections were not free and fair. What are some of the highlights or challenges that you want to bold that his legal team are likely to face in the Supreme Court?
The major challenge is that they had limited time. For you to have 10 days to collect evidence across the entire country is a big challenge. If you have collected evidence that there was intimidation in Kampala, you must collect evidence that there was intimidation in Arua, in Jinja, in all parts of the country. And it is on such small grounds that the court will say, yes, there was intimidation in Kampala, but there is no, you have not convinced court that that intimidation in Kampala affected the voting of voters across the entire country. So the challenge that you had, the law gives only 10 days to file a petition, makes it extremely difficult for somebody to compile evidence that convinces the court beyond reasonable doubt. And that's the big challenge with our court system, that the court must be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that this evidence you have produced has had an impact on the entire country. Now, that is going to be a big challenge. The courts may agree to the evidence, but the courts may fail to agree that that evidence had impact across the entire country. And that is the biggest challenge that the team has. So it will go a long way. I mean, whether the court, I cannot say the court will not, this is what the court is going to say, but I can say that courts can pronounce themselves on the incidences that happened. We now get back as political leaders to look into the entire political system. Much of what has not come to the courts of law can be discussed politically. And to me, that will also be another ground of trying to improve our electoral system.
Well, as we conclude, Henry, where do we see Uganda in the next few months?
Well, Uganda in the next few months will continue. Uganda is going to be stable. The people are firm. The people are not going to have violence. They have denounced violence. The most fundamental thing is that the people of Uganda have denounced violence. There is nobody who is going to drive them into violence. You have had all these counter accusations, so-and-so is planning violence, so-and-so is planning violence. But when you critically look at these details, the people of Uganda have tasted violence and they are not ready for a violent solution. So they believe that gradually we have to improve these processes. So the next few months or the next couple of years would require a lot of political courage on the part of the various politicians across the political divide to agree that yes, we have lost this one, but Uganda has to continue. We have lost this one, but Uganda has to continue. We have lost this one, but we need to build a system. We need to build an electoral system. I think what we are now struggling with is not necessarily the election of 2016. We are struggling with trying to create an electoral system that will ensure that the people who vote, the genuine votes are the ones counted. The genuine votes are the ones tallied. And it is on those genuine votes that a winner is declared. That is still the challenge of trying to improve our electoral system. And this will require a lot of political courage. I think that where we are now, despite all the defects, we still need to find a path of dialoguing. And this is an area that people have to be supported.
Well, speaking about dialogue, there are actually efforts by different stakeholders trying to bring Dr. Kiza Besigye and President Museveni on the same table to talk about the way forward after the elections. Can that see the light of day? It's a question that you and I can only give time to answer. Henry Kasacha, who is the Executive Director of Dialogue and Democracy Training Center, also a political analyst, joining us on Bottomline East Africa to cast more light on that. Well, back to you, Ben, in studio.
Many thanks. Many thanks, Solomon. We shall continue to keep our eye on happenings in Uganda. A 9-judge bench has already been constituted to take a look at former Prime Minister Mambazi's election petition. More than 40 lawyers hired to defend President Museveni. Now, on to our final thoughts tonight. The 17th ordinary session of the East African Community Heads of State Summit just added another page to the history of the community with the admission of the world's newest nation, South Sudan, as the 6th member of the East African Community. This is a major step in the region's quest for integration, and the people of South Sudan have reason to be jubilant. Analysts have intimated that it was long overdue that South Sudan be part of the EAC. The next step now is for the EAC to play its part in ending the conflict in South Sudan for the good of everyone in the region. This will be another key litmus test for the EAC fabric and metal, seeing as the community is struggling to solve the crisis in Burundi. The EAC summit has appointed former Tanzanian President Benjamin Mkapa to mediate in Burundi, but many Burundians feel that that is not enough. It will be interesting to see how the 5 heads of state deal and interact with South Sudanese President Salva Kiir in his infamous supremacy battle with the strange deputy Riek Machar. The bottom line is that the EAC has a role to play and should do its best to help end the political and humanitarian crisis in its newest member state. And that is the bottom line. That's all we have time for on the Bottomline East Africa tonight. Many thanks for joining us all through this week. Thanks for watching. I'm Ben Kitili. Up next is KTN Prime.